right, so I'll get us started. It's a Friday shortly after the working day, so inevitably people will come in or come out as it suits them. But hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is Chloe. My pronouns are she, her, and I am one of the co-chairs this year with Women's March Ottawa. First and foremost, we want to begin this event with a land acknowledgement. Women's March Ottawa acknowledges that we organize, work, and live on unceded and unsurrendered Algonquin Anishinaabe territory. While we know that land acknowledgements are growing more common, we want to use this as an intentional and thoughtful way to position ourselves and to provide meaningful and thankful acknowledgement to the Indigenous communities whose land we occupy. As we organize around feminist issues, we recognize the importance of ensuring this work is both anti-racist and decolonial in nature. We recognize the ways in which our presence on this land upholds colonialism and reproduces dispossession and violence for Indigenous peoples. For those of us who are settlers, we commit to working and learning more about how we can prioritize the rights of Indigenous peoples and encourage participants to consider this both during and after this session. A little bit about Women's March Ottawa before we officially start today's session. Formed in 2017, Women's March Ottawa is an Ottawa-based, entirely volunteer-run group committed to challenging all forms of systemic discrimination, bias, and oppression. We believe unwaveringly in building an inclusive feminist movement that centers Indigenous, Black, racialized, disabled, low-income, young, old, newcomer, refugee, and 2S LGBTQ+ women and gender-diverse people. Traditionally, our programming has consisted of a yearly march for gender equity and justice. However, this year, both in hopes of expanding our reach and our work, as well as, of course, due to COVID-19, we have pivoted to a full week of free online programming designed to bring feminists together to discuss a range of timely and important topics and issues. If you're not already, we encourage you to check out and register for the other events going on this week, as well as follow us on social media at Ottawa March across all platforms. We're also incredibly grateful for any financial donations to help support this week of programming, as well as future events. Thank you so much to the Canadian Federation of Nurses Unions, Rogers, Councillor Teresa Kavanagh, and generous individual donors for supporting this week of events. Information about registering for other events this week, our social media, and donating to support WMO is on the screen now, and I'm about to put it in the chat as well. There we go. So for today's session, we're here to continue our week of programming with a virtual documentary screening and director Q&A focused on the intersection of climate justice and feminist advocacy. In a moment, I'm going to hand it over to Liz Miller, who has graciously joined us tonight. She's one of the documentary's 5 directors, to introduce the film. We'll then spend about 45 minutes watching it together, and we'll have some time at the end for any questions for Liz. And we're hoping to wrap up just before 7:30 or so. We welcome folks to add comments or thoughts using the chat feature on Zoom throughout the session, and we will have time for Q&A at the end, so please feel free to pop any questions or thoughts in the Q&A box as well if anything comes up. At the same time, we are implementing a strict policy to ensure this space is safe and respectful, so please know that any comments or behavior that is hateful or disrespectful will result in you being removed from the session. Finally, for those who wish to use it, closed captioning is available for this session through Zoom, which you can enable or disable at the bottom of your screen. So now to officially kick off the session, I will stop talking and I'll hand it over to Liz, and I'll invite my colleague to stop screen sharing, and we'll ask Liz to spend a few minutes introducing herself and the documentary here before we hit play. So take it away, Liz.
Okay. Chloe, thank you so much for setting that up. I just want to, first of all, acknowledge how much hard work has gone into this series of events and how impressive it is. I think one of the things we've all learned through COVID, but I think fits so well with the theme of this week, is just resilience, is really the importance of relationships and figuring out how to find alternatives. And I just want to appreciate this really hard work and the passion that has gone into this. And I'm really, really honored that this film can be a part of this, this series. So I won't say too much, except for that I will be available afterwards. But I'll say a few things, and maybe it'll help. It'll be interesting as you're watching. The film came out of an initiative through a network that I'm a part of, the International Association of Women in Television and Radio. And we decided to create this participatory documentary One is a way to bring an issue that we felt like was not being addressed in international forums, and it was the intersection of climate justice and gender. And intersectionality, meaning like how does race and class and all of these intersecting issues kind of come into play around the climate. And so we decided that we really had to walk the walk, and that we should, if we were going to do this, none of us should travel. We set a whole bunch of like parameters so that we were really thinking about new modes of documentary production. So each of us chose a woman in our nearby community who was doing something innovative in the face of climate disruption. And so we really wanted our carbon footprint to be very small in the production, but we also really wanted to feature women doing things that were inspiring, not a kind of worst case scenario of things that were happening, but women really responding with innovation, just like you and Emily and your organizers. And then we also wanted to make sure that we had both women behind the camera and in front of the camera, that it was intergenerational, that we had young women who might be making their first film, as well as seasoned creators and producers. And we wanted to foreground gender and really like what that means. So those were the aspirations, and it was a really beautiful experiment for us, because in addition to making this film, we used it to think carefully about how we, as we're over 300 makers from around the world, how we were thinking about representing climate change. So I think I'll leave it at that. I hope you enjoy the film. I forgot to introduce myself. I am a documentary maker, but I'm based in Montreal, and I teach at Concordia University, and participatory media is kind of my passion and my practice, and I'll leave it at that.
Awesome. Thank you, Liz. And yeah, I think we knew we wanted to do something different for this session. So a documentary seemed like a great idea. And as we were kind of looking for things, and when I talked to you on the phone and when you shared kind of that kind of background piece, I was like, oh, this is even more perfect, because it's not only an incredible documentary, but the process and the thought and the care that went into it, I think is just so impactful and so compelling. So thank you so much for introducing yourself. And I'm going to ask my colleague to share her screen now. And the trials of Zoom, we've done some testing, and we hope this works for folks at home. If this is not working well for you, let us know in the chat. But we're going to screen share the documentary, spend the next 45 minutes watching it together. And yeah, hope you all enjoy.
Dere vil jo ikke bare stenge liksom oljevirksomhet utenfor Lofoten og Senja, men dere vil jo stenge til med Nordsjøen nå, dere. Alle kranene skal ned.
Ikke I morgen. Nei.
புதுச்சேரியின் இன்றைய கடற்கரை உயரம் கடலாவரத்திலிருந்து 20 கிலோமீட்டர் வரை 3 அடியாகவும் 20 கிலோமீட்டர் முதல்
அதுக்கடுத்து ஆனி ஆவடி ஆடிய இந்த மாதத்துலாம் வந்து மழை அதிகமாக வரும். இப்போ வந்து ரொம்ப அப்படியே அது அப்படியே உள்டாவாக அப்படி மாறிடுது. மழை வரவே இல்லை.
Strawberry. I don't know if it was the one, but
tout le mouvement d'étudier l'environnement sur les changements climatiques, c'est de aussi prendre conscience qu'il y a des gens qui vivent dans ces environnements-là qui sont parmi les plus touchés sur la Terre. Les déplacements sur la Terre, sur la mer sont plus difficiles.
Unless the needs of women and men are adequately incorporated into development programs, the programs are not going to be sustainable and the policies are not going to be effective. Begin to work together to see how you can address vile mtatatua hiyo shida ya maji huko juu, kwa sababu hata kama
We are not trying to get in the way of the so-called national interest, but we are trying to sustain our lands, our waters, our way of life for future generations that aren't here.
Ja, jeg har fått besøk av Silje Lundberg I dag, lederen I Natur og Ungdom. Men du, hør på meg da, hva skal vi leve av I dette landet, når vi ikke har oljen?
Vet du hva, det nå det på tide å komme seg ut av oljetåka og begynne å se etter andre muligheter for Nord-Norge. Og det burde man ha gjort for lenge siden. Men man har låst seg I den her oljetankegangen, så på sett og vis så har man jo mistet på en måte 10 år som man kunne ha brukt på å pushe frem veldig mange andre gode tiltak. Jeg heter Silje Lundberg, jeg 25 år gammel, så jeg leder I Natur og Ungdom. Kan vi bare ha sånn situation som jobber med lokale miljøproblemer der de bor, I tillegg til at vi også jobber nasjonalt og internasjonalt. I Norge så fant vi olje for nesten 45 år siden. Og da I løpet av de 45 årene så har vi tjent oss enormt rik på norsk olje og gass. På statsbudsjettet så den vel noe sånn som hver fjerde krone, tror jeg, kommer fra oljenæringen. Og det har vært med å bygge opp det velferdssamfunnet vi har I dag, som gjør at man har gratis skoler, man har gode helsetilbud og så videre, blant annet fordi at vi bruker pengene fra oljenæringen inn der. Men det som har begynt å skje den siste tida, de siste 5 årene kanskje, at vi har blitt for avhengig av den, så den I ferd med å utkonkurrere all annen industri på land. Oljenæringen bare utkonkurrerer alt mulig annet. Så vi I ferd med å gjøre oss en vanvittig stor bjørnetjeneste hvis vi fortsetter med dette oljeeventyret som vi har hatt I 45 år.
Ja, det Silje Lundberg som sitter her, Natur og Ungdom. Vi snakker om klimaendringer, vi snakker om natur og miljø, om forurensning, altså denne kloden vår. Hva det som driver deg? Hva det som ligger I bunn for engasjementet ditt, tenker jeg?
Jeg vet ikke, jeg var 12 år og rebell, og så skjønte jeg at verden var blodig urettferdig. Og at det ikke an å gjøre noe med det. Så da prøver jeg å gjøre det jeg kan gjøre med det. Så prøver jeg å få politikerne til å gjøre det samme. Det liksom her. Jeg har vært på fisketur da. Padlet ut med sånne småbåter til små skjær rundt omkring. Omtrent hele, eller alle kystarealene til Norge, alt havarealet omtrent åpnet for oljeindustrien. Det veldig lite som lukket. Og så har du områdene utenfor Lofoten, Vesterålen og Senja, som noen øyer I nord, over Polarsirkelen. Så det på en måte arktiske farvann, som vi gjennom de siste 13 årene cirka har greid å holde stengt for oljevirksomhet, men som oljeindustrien gjerne vil inn i, og som lokalpolitikere i nord gjerne vil åpne. Det er så unikt, sant? At du har hvalene, du har fiskene, du har sjøfuglene, du har alt det. Og utenfor de her øyene så gyter den siste store torskestammen i verden, så de har en enorm verdi for fiskeriene. Så man har lurt hele Nord-Norge til å tro at den eneste løsningen for å få flere arbeidsplasser og alt som for denne regionen, det er å få olje. Så er man villig da til å risikere så sinnssykt mye for noen få 100 arbeidsplasser. Den siste tida, de siste 2 årene, så har jeg begynt å få et sånn enormt savn for den nordnorske naturen. Sånn at nå for hver gang da, som jeg er i Nord-Norge og ser de her fjelltoppene, og ser de her enorme sandstrendene, eller det et sånn asurblått hav, eller hva det måtte være, så får jeg en helt sånn, det er akkurat som at jeg forelsker meg i liksom min egen landsdel om igjen og om igjen og om igjen og om igjen. Altså, om Statoil hadde sendt opp en rigg i morgen, så hadde jeg ligget foran den riggen i overmorgen. Det er på en måte så langt jeg ville gått. Så det er det ikke noe tvil om. Lofoten, Vesterålen og Senja, det representerer på en måte et veiskille for Norge. Både når det kommer til å ta vare på sårbar natur, og når det kommer til klima. For dersom ikke verdens rikeste land skal la noe av oljen sin ligge, så skjønner jeg ikke helt hvordan land som skal ha råd til å gjøre det. Og dersom det ikke er de mest unike og sårbare havområdene vi skal spare for oljeindustrien, så skjønner jeg ikke hvordan områder det er som er verdt å bevare.
கடலுக்குள்ளே மீன் பிடிக்க கட்டுமரத்தில போறோமே ஐலசா ஐலசா கடல் மாதா கண் திறப்பால் கவலையெல்லாம் போக்கிடுவாள் ஐலசா ஐலசா.
ஃபோன் எடுத்தா யாருமா பேசுறது? ஃபோன் பண்ணுறேன், வேறு யாருக்கா ஃபோன் பண்ணுறேன், பஞ்சாயத்து தலைவர் கேஷியர் யாருக்கா தலைவர், யாருமா அலௌன்ஸ் பண்ணுற மகேஸ்வரிங்க சொல்லுதா? ஓகே, என்னம்மா சொல்லுமா, இந்த தகவல் அலௌன்ஸ் பண்ணலாமா அப்படின்னு கேட்டோம். சரி.
ஐலசா ஐலசா வலை வீசி பிடிக்க போறேன் விதவிதமான மீன்களை தான்.
சாப்பிடல. சுனாமின்னு ஆக்சுவலாக அப்போ என்னன்னு தெரியாது. சுனாமி வர பார்த்து இங்கே கடலோரம் இருக்கிறவங்களுக்கு மட்டும்தான் சேதாரம் ஆச்சு. தானே புயல் வந்தவருக்கு ஃபுல்லாக ஊர் அமௌண்ட் ஃபுல்லாக எல்லாமே அழிஞ்சுது. சுனாமியோட தானே புயல் ரொம்பவும் பாய்ச்சிருக்கு மக்களுக்கு. சுனாமியோட தானே புயல் வந்த பிறகு இவ்வளோ கிடச்சிது, இவ்வளோ கிடைக்க ஆரம்பிச்சிது மீன். 3 அடியாகவும் 20 கிலோமீட்டர் முதல் 50 கிலோமீட்டர் வரை
4 அடியாகவும் காணப்படும். காற்று தென்கிழக்கு தென்மேற்கு 19 கிலோமீட்டர் வேகம் வரை வீசக்கூடும்.
ஆக எங்களுக்கு வந்து விகேஸ்லேருந்து தகவல் வருது. தகவல் வந்ததும் நாங்கள் அலௌன்ஸ் பண்ணுவோம் என்னென்ன கடல் அலை உயரமும் கடலில் இந்த அளவுக்கு அடிக்கும் நீங்கள் பார்த்து போங்கன்னா அலௌன்ஸ் பண்ணுவோம். அப்படி அதிகமாக அடித்தா போகாதீங்கன்னு சொல்லுவான். அப்புறம் மீன் கிடைக்கிற இடத்த சொல்லுவான். மீன் கிடைக்கிறது பெரிய போட்டுக்காரங்க தான் போய் மீன் பிடிச்சின்னு வருவாங்க. அப்போது அந்த பெரிய போட்டுக்காரங்களுக்கு ஓரளவு வருவா வருது. சின்ன சின்ன கட்டுமர போட்டுக்கும் வருவா வரல. அந்த நாங்கள் அலௌன்ஸ் பண்ணுறத வச்சு தான் அவங்க போய் மீனே பிடிக்கிறாங்க. சார் சார் சொல்லுங்கள் சார். சுனாமிக்கு பிறகு மீனெல்லாம் ரொம்பவும் கம்மியாகிக்கினே இருக்குது. நாளடைவில் கொஞ்சம் கொஞ்சமாக கம்மியாகினே இருக்குது. அதுக்கடுத்து வந்து சுருக்கு வலையை போட்டு வேற இந்த சின்ன மீன் முதல் கொண்டு எல்லாமே வழிச்சுட்டு வந்துடுறாங்க. அப்போ வரப்பாத்து அந்த சின்ன மீன் இருந்தால் தான் வந்து பெருசாகி அது வந்து சின்ன சின்ன மீனாக உருவாகி மறுபடியும் பெருசாகும். அப்போ அந்த சுருக்கு வலை இருக்கிறதால இனப்பெருக்கம் ரொம்ப கம்மியானதால் வருவாயில் ரொம்ப கம்மியாக இருக்குது மீன்.
மீன் கிடைச்சா 10 ரூபா கிடைக்கும். இல்லைன்னா நஷ்டமா வீட்டுக்கு தான் போகணும். பஸ் சார்ஜ் போட்டு வரது நஷ்டமா தான் நஷ்டமா. அப்புறம் அதுக்காக என்ன செய்யலாம்? நஷ்டம் யாராவது கொடுக்க போகிறாங்க கிடையாது.
மீன் எடுத்துன்னு போய் அதை விற்று பஸ் பேரு உங்களோட சார்ஜி அது லாபமாக தான் கிடைக்கும். அதான் கிடைக்கும். புரியுதுங்களா?
சரி, ஃபிஷரிஸ் ஆஃபீஸ்லேருந்து வந்தாங்களா? அவங்க ஃபிஷரிஸ் கார்டு எடுக்கணும்ல, அது எடுக்கலை. இப்போ எப்போ எடுப்பாங்கன்னு கேட்கலான்னு வந்தோம்.
அப்படியா? ஃபிஷரிஸ்லேருந்து வரும் பார்த்து அவங்க வந்து என்கிட்ட சொல்லுவாங்க அலௌன்ஸ் பண்ண சொல்லி. நான் அப்போ அலௌன்ஸ் பண்ணுறேன். அலௌன்ஸ் பண்ணதும் அதை கேட்டு நீ வா, நான் உனக்கு நான் வாங்கி தரேன்.
சரி.
இன்கைஸ் போர்டு ஒர்க் ஆகலை. நம்ம வந்து விஆர்சிக்கு தெரிய வச்சு இவங்க இதை சரி பண்ணால் தான் சரி வரும்.
நம்ம மக்கள் வந்து அடிக்கடி தகவல் கேட்கறதால இன்கைஸ் வந்து இப்போ ரிப்பேராக இருக்குது. அதில் வந்து நமக்கு நியூஸ் சொல்ல முடியல. எனக்கு வந்து செல்ஃபோன் மூலிமா வந்து ஆடியோ மெசேஜ் 2 வேலையும் வந்துட்டு இருக்கு. அதை வந்து நான் மக்களுக்கு ஒலிபெருக்கி மூலிமா அனௌன்ஸ் பண்ணிடுறேன்.
நான் வீட்டில் பார்த்து என்ன ஏதுன்னு தெரியாது இருந்தது. அப்போ நான் நாளடைவில் எனக்கு எல்லாம் செய்தியும் தெரியுமாகத்தால் அவங்க வந்து பரவாயில்ல இப்போ இந்த அளவுக்கு ஆகிட்டால அவங்களுக்கு நம்மளும் ஆகணும் சொல்லிட்டு போட்டியும் வருது. ஆக நான் அவங்களையும் கூப்பிட்றேன், வாங்க உங்களுக்கு என்ன ஏது வேணுமோ நாங்கள் சொல்லித்தரோம் வாங்கன்னு தான் சொல்லி கூப்பிட்றோம். அப்போது அந்த திறமை அவங்களுக்கும் வேணும்னு சொல்லிட்டு எதிர்பார்க்குறாங்க. காட்டு
கால்பட்ட பிறகு
ஆக்சிடெண்ட் 2 வீலரில் போகிறது சடன்லி அதெல்லாம் சொல்ல சடன்லி இடித்து விழுந்துட்டார். வண்டி வந்து மேலே சாஞ்சி காலில் விழுந்துருச்சு. கால் விழவும் உடஞ்சிச்சு. நோ போக முடியாது இப்போதைக்கு. நான் சம்பாதிக்கிறத வச்சு தான் என் பிள்ளைங்களையும் எங்கள் வீட்டையும் கவனம்.
எனக்கு ரொம்ப பெருமையாக இருக்குது. அதாவது இந்த தகவல் மையத்துக்கு போனதுலேருந்து அந்த மக்கள் வந்து நமக்கு சொல்கிறத வரைக்கும் வச்சு எனக்கு வந்து பெருமையாக இருக்குது.
ஒரு அவேர்னஸ் ப்ரோக்ராம் ஏற்கனவே கொடுத்தோம்ல நம்ம. அப்போ கடலில் வந்து பிளாஸ்டிக் கவரு, இந்த காப்பி கவரு இதெல்லாம் போடக்கூடாது சொன்னாங்க. மீண்டும் மீண்டும் போட்டுன்னு இருந்தாக்கா அப்புறம் எப்படி மீன் கிடைக்கும்?
பானிபூரி கடையை பஸ் நிறுத்துங்க.
பானிபூரி
பிளாஸ்டிக் கவராக நின்று போயிடுச்சு. அந்த பிளாஸ்டிக் தட்டோடு தயாரிச்சாங்க புதுசாக. அவனும் தான் அந்த மாதிரி நாசம் பண்ணானுங்க.
அதோட என்னென்னா ஹாஸ்பிட்டலில் வர்ற கழிவு நீர் வந்து பாதிக்குது. ஃபேக்ட்ரியில் வந்து அந்த கெமிக்கல்லாம் வந்து கடல் வழியாகவே கலக்கி விட்டுறாங்க. மீன் உற்பத்தி ஆகாதனால தான் மீனவர் ரொம்ப கஷ்டப்பட்டுன்னுக்குறாங்க. அதான் வந்து அந்த ப்ராப்ளத்தெல்லாம் எங்ககிட்ட சொல்லின்னுக்குறாங்க. நம்மளால் முடிஞ்சது நாம் கவர்மெண்ட்டுக்கு சொல்லணும்னு சொல்லிட்டு சொல்கிறாங்க அவங்க. நாளடைவில் வந்து இந்த காலநிலை மாறிக்கினே வர்றதால இங்கே இந்த கடலில் மீன் கிடைக்கிறதுக்கும் இதாகுது. மார்கழி மாதம் வந்து பனி பெய்யுன்னு சொல்லுவாங்க, ரொம்ப கம்மியாக இருக்குது. நாளடைவில் அந்த பனி இப்படி தள்ளி போயினே இருக்குது. அதாவது அந்த சித்திரை மாதம் இப்படி புரண்டு வருது. எங்களோட கிராமத்தில் கனவு என்னென்னா, நான் நினைக்கிறது என்னென்னா, என் மக்களுக்கு நிறையா தகவல்லாம் சொல்லி அவங்க நல்லா பயனடைஞ்சு அவங்கவுங்க வசதி வாய்ப்பு எல்லாம் பெருகி அவங்கவுங்களுக்கு போட்டு வச்சுருந்து நான் அவங்கவுங்க பிள்ளைங்களை நல்ல மாதிரியாக படித்து வச்சு பெரிய ஆள் ஆக்கணும்னு என்னோட ஆசை.
அக்கா இதை வச்சு நான் பிறலாயிடும். மீன் கிடைக்கிற இடம், மீன் போகிற இடம், கடல் உயரம் வர்ற இடத்துலாம் வந்து அவங்க சொல்லுவாங்க. அவங்க சொல்கிறபடியே நாங்கள் பாதுகாப்பாக போவோம். அது இல்லைன்னா தங்கிடுவோம். அது மீறி நாங்கள் போவோம், கடல் அடித்து எங்களை வீணாக்கிடுவோம்.
Shovel to Amy.
Sometimes when you want to identify your plants, you need the root. So usually we have to look, even a tree. If a tree, you cannot collect the whole plant. Like you cannot cut the tree and take the roots out of the ground. So you can just take a branch like this.
You have to dig down to the roots.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the roots are longer than the leaves.
Long roots for short leaves.
Okay.
Il y a beaucoup de recherches qui s'est faites sur l'environnement de l'Arctique, mais sans nécessairement inclure les communautés, d'essayer comme scientifique, qu'il y ait comme des échanges finalement avec les communautés pour le bénéfice de tout le monde. C'est ça qu'on essaye de mettre en place maintenant. I'm José and I'm from University of Quebec in Trois-Rivières, and it's part of the Center for Northern Studies, which is englobing like many universities across Quebec. I'm sure you see some researchers coming in and out, and I know many of you don't know why. It's because it's kind of a hot spot for climate change. It's one of the places in the world where it's warming the fastest. And plants are one of the plants we want to study because the animals are using the plants and the people are using the plants. toujours trouvé que quand tu campes dans des on-the-land, c'est là que les échanges sont les plus beaux à voir, à la fois entre eux, avec nous. Les rapports sont comme plus faciles parce qu'on partage, on mange ensemble, on campe, on installe le campement. Donc il y a comme une confiance qui s'installe ou des liens puisqu'ils se font facilement. Je trouve que quand on fait genre un focus group dans une pièce, puis que là, tout le monde s'en retourne chez eux après, là. Moi, l'usage des plantes par les humains, c'est toujours été quelque chose qui m'a vraiment fascinée. J'ai eu des contrats pour aller faire des inventaires dans le Nord, puis ça a été vraiment la piqûre. On a commencé des études avec l'année polaire internationale dans un projet pour faire des entrevues sur leur perception à eux des changements climatiques. Ça confirme ce qu'on observe par satellite, des trucs comme ça, ou des observations sur le terrain. Puis, mais ça confirme, ça va beaucoup plus loin que ça. Ça nous amène d'autres connaissances sur l'écologie des espèces, sur la distribution des espèces, les usages. C'est vraiment complémentaire. C'est sûr que la thématique sur laquelle on travaillait, comme les petits fruits, végétation, c'était au départ une thématique plus de femmes, parce que c'est des femmes qui étaient plus les détenteurs de connaissances sur la végétation, sur les petits fruits.
That's the bay here. You see Sanikiluak is there, so we're here. And we can zoom in with that's the zoom. If you use the down button, you're gonna zoom to the area. And that's the ride, you see the little dots? That's the ride we did yesterday.
Avec les jeunes, de briser cette idée préconçue-là, que la science, c'est quelque chose qui est comme loin d'eux. Donc, leur montrer que ça fait partie de la vie, que c'est les plantes sur lesquelles on marche, dans la forêt, la mer, les roches.
So it's just a notebook.
Eux autres, ils ont toujours été connectés beaucoup à l'environnement, donc c'est déjà quelque chose qu'ils faisaient.
The open land is all here, going all the way there. Our tents are here, maybe. All the tents are around here.
Moi, I'm the paiko pissä vain että uiva sääntelyksessä käy sota isot. Isha and that's a bit gas attack and it's a lot of choice. And I ask it to see that you I had. No, that's it. And so I can remember that one shot. Yeah, and that's say it. No, it's say don't just say she guys. And much, no, it's it, but no, it's say nice just to watch. I had to make this and that's just what, yeah. It's just what up to be. What's that is.
Les déplacements commencent à être affectés par la glace qui prend plus tard l'hiver, qui fond plus vite, qui est plus mince, ont plus de danger. Sur le sol, moins de neige, plus de vent, que c'est balayé. Et ça a un impact sur les animaux. Nous, c'est comme des concepts un peu abstraits. Puis eux, c'est leur garde-manger, c'est leur route. Ça a une dimension vraiment plus palpable et concrète que nous.
Now we to make here no can. Yamaga up much he got to give up. Magan STI of Saganot. I hope Smith was but I nice and you got 3 years and STI of Sagan. Now it's the team Natavana, I of Saganot. I should not. That's to Magatimi Hospital. Yana such a meal that is like that. Magagot Magan was not sure. Well, I'm not thought I started to move to the Nagaga. I should say to my good at Samando. That is me to at Toyo. I will not show up to my national. And don't know it. That's what I know. Yeah, Magnus, my seven, it dies out now, but many other than 2,000. But near time you told I would on Java, Yando I stop to give one. We show our one. You go home to the Yamashima.
I'm an environmentalist working in areas of water resources management. And now, of course, with the coming in or setting in of the climate change, it's been agreed globally that the water sector is most vulnerable sector from the impacts of climate change. I work with communities in community development, and I'm very passionate about the role of women.
Lakini ile kitu ya muhimu tunafanya sana ni kuleta the experts na the ministries. Tuseme kama ni government, tunawaleta hapa ili wanaweza kuongea na wakulima. Na tumeshukuru sana kwa kutukaribisha hapa.
Riu ona ngienda kurima ta riria gutari mbura-ri ni hari thina tondu tukarima mboga ringi ikoma tukageria kwenja marima ati nigetha tugitege mai marima mau makanyua maĩ rĩu niĩ ingĩteithio nyone ũrĩa nguona tũmaĩ kana nĩ irima nguona mũndũ ũngĩndeithia ũrĩa ngwenja no ngene mũno nĩgetha ndĩkĩigĩre maĩ-inĩ mage na nĩ ngwenda kuma gũkũ.
I've worked with women from different parts of this country, and what we have been trying to do is to see how we can be able to strengthen the capacity of those women to be able to take up leadership roles in agriculture and natural resource management. The way we do it is to strengthen their capacity through training, giving them leadership skills, informing them of the environment around them, the rights they have. I always ask myself, what is going to be different for men? What is going to be different for women? And I have identified that they have so many challenges and so many issues. One of them being able to put food on the table for their families. And the other one is, of course, being able to get water, being able to get fuel. I really want to change the lives of women so that they can also be able to live more sustainably. Through introduction ya climate change, na tondu ni ndaigua maundu maria mothe mwaria uria climate yakwa nyucenjetie na uria climate iyo imwikitete imwaffectite itigo koguo ukenda kudino na climate change ri kiambere mundu ekaga ni kuona ngwitiririria atia nigetha maundu maya moka na hinya ri ugakorwo we maguka na magutige ki urugamite oro uguo. You see women very excited, desiring to go back home so that they can be able to implement what they have learned.
I'm a farmer here, and I grow potatoes, sell milk, and also vegetables around here. I'm also the chairman, Water Resource Users Association. We realized that there was a lot of degradation in my area of jurisdiction. The impact of the soil erosion had an impact at the Lake Naivasha. So we basically, as Water Resource Users Association, are here as a link between those upstream landowners and the downstream beneficiaries of the efforts that we are making up here. What we normally do, we look for the ownership of the land. And in most cases, the landowners are men. But when we come to on the ground, these are not the people doing the actual work. So when we talk to Annabelle, we realize that if we could focus on the women who are really doing the actual work, that would be more sustaining.
Mvua ikinyesha, maji yanateremkia chini ya mchanga, ikateremka, ikajaza hii shimo.
Na hii maji huwa inaisha ama inakuwaga
haishagi? Kwa hivyo inakutana na mvua hiyo ingine.
Okay. You can see quite a bit of conservation that has taken place up there in the mountains because before it was bare and there were no trees. The tree cover had really gone down. I think at that point we were talking about maybe 2% tree cover or forest cover in this country. But after quite a bit of training and talking to the farmers, you can see there is a lot of plantations that have taken place, and they have taken quite a bit of effort and interest to see that they can be able to put barriers to ensure that there is not going to be any soil erosion. Because for example, now you can see like this particular farmer, she's quite happy that she's able to plant flowers. She wasn't able to do that before, and the soil was so degraded. But now they're able to actually sustain and conserve the soil because the soil is no longer being carried to the river.
Tukasomeshwa habari za kupanda miti. Hii ndio ilikuwa ya kwanza. Si unaziona pale juu?
Hiyo line yote kwa fence,
hiyo line yote. Alafu walitupea hii sala.
Ilikuwa okay. The napier grass.
Napier. Napier ndio walitupea. Nikapanda hii. Nikapanda across. Ndio mchanga isiteremshwe na maji.
So it's quite exciting to see that the farmers are also very happy to see that as a result of that, it is also giving them more food production. And that also means that, giving them maybe the ability to be able to resist the impacts of climate change.
The workshop we had in Gadara. The workshop was very successful, and we came up with issues, and the community were able to come up with some interventions that.
What I would want to see in the next 5 years is women being able to participate effectively and adequately in the decision making at their county level. Either biogas or something. So having both women and the county governments actually sitting together and thinking what issues are there for women, what issues are there for the youth. So those guys are empowered. Yeah. And so for me, whenever I look at some of this work, I see women are living better lives. They are more empowered. That gives me all the energy to go on and to think what else I can be able to do. There must be a solution. Yeah. So what you want?
I come from a community of strong women. And Saikas is the community that I call home. It's located right in the heart of what is known as British Columbia in Canada. We are not just another stakeholder, to sit around the table with other people who have interests in these projects. We are the sovereign people of these territories.
Enbridge wants to ram destructive tar sands oil pipelines through the Rocky Mountains, through our territories, and all the way to the Pacific Ocean. Then they want to threaten the Pacific coast with oil spills from over 200 supertankers a year in some of Canada's most dangerous waters. We hold more than 25% of Enbridge's proposed pipeline route in our territories, and we will never allow it to be built.
Power Shift is a gathering of hundreds of youth from across BC, but we've seen attendees come from Northwest Territories, Alberta, and beyond. And Power Shift is about, raising awareness on different issues around environmental racism, climate justice, and to give voice to the frontline impacted communities. Communities who are being impacted by tar sands expansion. The power is starting to shift to the people who actually are on those front lines, and Canadians in general who are looking for more accountability from, governments that are supposed to be leading.
anniversary of I Don't Know More is coming up on November the 10th. And I'm like, yeah. I don't know more. What does it mean?
Our communities from the Yucatán Alliance have been very vocal from day one that we will put our lives on the line. We will stand in front of those bulldozers when they come. But we don't want it to get to that point. We want this government to deal with us on a government-to-government basis. We've been hearing the federal government and the province as well refer to this resistance to Indigenous peoples as opponents of the national interest, trying to label us as eco-terrorists and villainize our communities, villainize our voices, and try to instill fear within the people who have found their voice.
We're here and we're not going anywhere. We will not go away and we will only get stronger.
This pipeline proposal plans to cross over 1,000 streams and rivers, many that are critical fish-bearing streams. Our people depend on the salmon and other life beings that are in those water systems. It's the water that connects each and every one of us. With Canada coming and saying that these pipelines are safe, they want us to look in a silo. So it's just look at this pipeline. Don't think of what's happening in the tar sands and how it could be expanded. It has nothing to do with this pipeline. Don't think about those tankers, those 200 tankers that would travel on the coast. It has nothing to do with this pipeline. Don't think about the increase of emissions and carbon into our atmosphere that, impacts not only our communities where this project is being proposed, but it is becoming a global issue. One pipeline spill would impact everything. Our plants, our fish, our animals, human health, all those things would be threatened. Specifically, this company known as Enbridge has had over 500 pipeline spills in a span of 7 years. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And it's always a constant struggle. We all need water for life. We all need air to breathe, and that is the basis of our resistance. No short-term contracts or short-term work opportunities are going to replace the water that gives everything life. Many leaders in this movement are Indigenous women, and just the strength of these women have inspired me to keep going as well. My late great-grandmother, the Dr. Sophie Thomas, she was a traditional healer and medicine woman for our people and has given me gifts to carry on the ancient knowledge of traditional medicines. It is my duty as a woman, my duty to my nation to ensure that these important pieces of our identity are protected and passed down for generations to come. She always promoted, the health of the environment, and her quote was, "If we take care of our earth, it'll take care of us. If we destroy it, we'll destroy ourselves." And this is a message that we've been bringing, to these companies, to the governments. It's been unprecedented in Canadian history that so many people have engaged in a review process over a certain type of development, specifically the Northern Gateway Enbridge pipeline. Over 4,000 people across the nation have submitted their opposition to this project. We have non-Indigenous peoples, environmental organizations, different unions. It's not just protecting our communities, Yankatane people. Yankatane means people of the land. We have a responsibility not only to ourselves, but to our brothers and sisters around the world who are being impacted by climate change. We're not scared. We're gonna keep fighting.
Amazing. I'm gonna spotlight Liz and I now. Okay. Incredible. And hardly any Zoom glitches, which is all you can ask for. It's just what an amazing documentary. And you just cover, like, there's so much that's covered both in terms of like topics and themes, but also geography. And I'd encourage folks to, throw some questions in the chat or Q&A, because otherwise I have written down about 10 questions throughout the course of the film. And it's not the first time I've seen it. But I will start out and I'll ask you a question, Liz, just, as people are maybe gathering thoughts or putting any thoughts in there. But the first thing that I kind of want to ask is you released this 7 years ago, if I'm correct, and something that strikes me is, that could have very well been released yesterday. Things that we're still seeing and that we're dealing with, including in the Canadian context. So in your view, what, if anything, has changed?
Well, I think that's a great question. And, for me, what has changed in 7 years is this unbelievable movement of young women around the world. Like, I would say the 13 to 20-year-olds of this world have risen up and have essentially called into action adults, scientists. They have become the moral vanguard of our planet. And, I just think of really what a pivotal role they have been playing. And I guess that's, really where I if I was to remake the film, with the collaborators, I think we'd even go younger. I think I would have loved to have had some of the really young protagonists who are just like shaking things up.
Yeah, that's I think so. I mean, yeah, in the past 7 years, I think we've started to see that too, like, really kind of becoming mainstream, like some of these younger climate activists from around the world. And that actually kind of leads me into another question, which is maybe like less of a well-formulated question than it is just a thought that I would love your reactions to. Just thinking about the fact that it, as this, you obviously depict that it is so often women, and so often like marginalized women, Indigenous women, women from lower middle income countries who are on the front lines of climate justice activism. And this work is so important, obviously, and so necessary, but it's not always safe. It's not always recognized, or not usually recognized. And it's not usually, it's not usually paid in terms of being able to sustain, your family. And I guess, how do you strike a balance between recognizing and valuing this work and how important it is, while also, making sure that it's not women who have to do it all, if that makes sense?
Oh my gosh, that's such an important question. I mean, we saw that with the movement for violence against women. And really, I feel like in the last decade, we've seen such unbelievable leadership of men, like male athletes, really stepping forward and saying violence against women impacts my life, and becoming leaders. And I don't know that would have been the first step, but I think it's been such a pivotal step in terms of engaging the broader community. So I think the same thing. I mean, this film, I think what we realized in these conversations, as I was saying, that over 300 of us were sort of beginning to percolate, was why aren't women in more important decision makings, in more important policy places, making decisions about the future? And so we felt like we really wanted to foreground, if you don't involve women in decision making, you are missing a huge part of this issue. And so we wanted to really like use it to think through that. But in terms of, you're right, that so many women leaders are women. And I guess what I understand is that women are and have been at the forefront of feeling the impacts. Like if you look at flooding around the world, it's like a lot of women, for example, or even climate migration. A lot of men have been migrating in very difficult circumstances, but oftentimes women are left behind with their children. And so they're really dealing hands-on with these issues. And so I think that it's not a coincidence that women are also at the forefront of finding innovation and finding solutions and demonstrating resilience and innovating. But I completely agree that the solution is not leaving it up to women. It's just kind of really ensuring that women's leadership is visualized, is taken into account, and integrated into every level of decision making, from the grassroots to policy. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think, like, I say that also thinking it, being able to spotlight and amplify, like as you've done here, the work that's being done is so important, because a lot of it is often not visible to a lot of people unless you're right there. And I think we've also seen, I think it's so great that it also featured people who wouldn't necessarily be featured otherwise. And we saw that, I think, with like Greta Thunberg, how everybody knew who she was, but how there were so many other young folks and other young women who were doing work in the world that weren't getting as much attention necessarily. We had a really good panel yesterday, and we had somebody, the co-founder of Assembly of Seven Generations, which is an Indigenous youth organization, and basically saying how, to be involved in an issue, you don't have to be affected by an issue to be involved in it, which kind of rings true with what you're saying right now. And actually, a question in the chat that just came up is someone asking, why aren't there more young men getting active in the climate change struggle? And I wonder if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, my feeling is that, people become active because I've done a lot of research and I've thought a lot about what changes people's behavior. And apparently it's of course, these larger communication discourses that makes a big difference, but it's also like close friends and like the immediacy of the people in our community. This is really, really important. And so I think part of our challenge is really being creative about how we invite the men in our lives into this movement, and making it seem like it's, I don't mean to say, like, I don't mean to seem ridiculous when I say it, but that it's that you're joining something that adds value to your life. I was going to say pleasure, but I mean, I think that what we've learned, you asked me another thing that I think we've learned in the last decade or since we made the film is, there was a whole, there's been different stages of how we communicate around the threats to our environment. And some of them were about like, our grandchildren. There's been a plethora of different strategies, but I think the strategy that's most effective is the strategy of finding meaning in your life and feeling like you're joining something that matters. And I think if we can kind of pull in all of the men that we love in our lives, and I think that's a first step. And so I think it's like, we really wanted this film to be positive rather than scary and frightening and horrific. And I think that's been an approach that I've been taking about trying to involve people I care about. And it's actually, I think it's really challenging and really hard, to, you don't really want to, we need to be foregrounding this in all parts of our lives, but without making people feel shame, making people feel fear, but just sort of finding ways of holding ourselves accountable within a larger framework. And I think that there are beautiful rewards. I mean, one of the kooky, crazy things about COVID was that so many of us began to look deeply around us and really focus on local environments and the pleasure of not getting on a plane. And I think there's something to really learn from the experiences that we've been through in the last 14 months about the value of our immediate surroundings.
Yeah. How many people have gotten plants during COVID? I think we around like the fear thing, because now you see young people, but young people, especially like in spades, who are like reporting like climate anxiety and people making major decisions in their lives based on like climate change and environmental change and things that they don't know whether they're going to be able to rely on long term, which is terrifying. And I also think like, and when you foreground it in that fear and that doom, people who have more privilege, it's easy for them to just turn it off. If you're not living in a way that you're directly in, you can just shut it down if you're in a position to be able to do that. I'm going to ask one more of my questions because we do have time, and I think you'll have a lot actually to say on it. But you touched on this a little bit at the beginning, but the process of creating this film, being intentionally very participatory in nature and really trying to do filmmaking in a different way. And I know that participatory piece is a big part of what you do in your work in general. And I was also struck by this because we were talking before. I work as a researcher, and specifically in feminist research, and participatory research is just such an important piece of feminist research as well. And I guess, could you talk a little bit more about why this approach made sense for a documentary like this, and why that participatory piece fits in so well with the gender element, as well as maybe some of the challenges associated with doing that, because there's also definitely, it's not always the most straightforward or the easiest.
Mm. Sure. So I'll start with the positive. The amazing part of this project was, so we had, as I mentioned, our organization has over 300 members. And the first thing we did was put a call out and just begin to solicit stories. And the advantage of having, we had 5 directors, 2 were from Canada, I cheated, and the others were, when you have multiple directors on a project, the potential for distribution and outreach just goes, it is amazing. Like, this was on Kenyan television, this was screened all throughout India, without doing the kind of work that I've often had to do for other films. The distribution was enhanced by this co-authorship. Lots of us had a stake in this and seeing this film make a difference. And so that, I think, is a super advantage to the participatory methodology. The second part was, it was way cheaper. I can just tell you. The budget for this was very, very affordable because nobody was getting into planes and flying all over the place. We basically, we edited it here in Canada, and that was part of the challenge. The challenge was getting so the call was, I asked everybody to edit a 9-minute short film and send it to me with all their assets and materials on a drive. So they sent the drive, and like a hard drive. And it was a super huge challenge to edit that into one piece, because different countries, you work in different formats, different software programs. So it was like different languages, just bringing those together and creating a sort of a coherence to the different pieces. So there was one piece that had a voiceover, so we kind of worked with the director to take the voiceover out, but she still shared her short, but we compiled it into this collective piece. So I would say the challenges are like any challenge in a big communications project. There's different languages involved, there's different styles and voices, and so the animation was really helpful to us in kind of creating like a pathway through the pieces. And then the advantages were, I think, really just the potential impact. That was like the biggest. And I should say this is just the relationships. One of the things you and I were talking about is, so what are we doing now? you know, what project are we working on now? And right now, I'm still working with the same women. We're a committee trying to figure out, you know, our next productions. We've created 4 similar productions like this. This was on climate change. We also did a film on violence against women journalists. We've done one on reproductive rights. We've done one on women and migration. So this was the pilot, and then we kind of kept pushing into themes, and we're trying to figure out what our theme is, and how it might be connected to what the global pandemic. Without, again, I think a lot of people are feeling fatigue around that. So we're also kind of thinking about the theme of what have we learned, and what might we apply in a potentially in a post-pandemic, let's just say it, in a post-pandemic environment.
One day we will get there. Like there will be a post-pandemic environment. No, that's awesome. And it's the coherence piece, I think, is so interesting, because as a viewer, I think when I first came across it, I didn't realize there were 5 different directors, and I think you wouldn't know. Like it comes across as so coherent and so like it just fits together so well. So that's so cool to hear the process that it maybe wasn't originally like that, which is so interesting. I'm just looking through the chat just to maybe read aloud some of the things that people are saying. Hard to believe that the Conservative Party could even debate the fact of climate change. Yes. Women know that when we have destroyed the planet, we won't be able to eat money. And referencing gasp, grandmothers acting to save the planet. We did have a question that was actually quite similar to what I asked, that came directly to me about sort of the process of filming and editing, which maybe I can ask one follow-up question on that, because we had talked about it, but someone saying, I wonder if women's groups having the name women in their name doesn't make men hesitate about joining their efforts, which I think is a really interesting point. And also someone saying that there needs to be non-Indigenous objection to the unequal treatment of Indigenous climate activists who receive harsher punishments for violating injunctions against peaceful protest, which, yeah, I think absolutely. A lot of people making good points, but one thing that you had mentioned to me when talking about sort of the process was that your piece that you helped direct, or you directed, was the final one in BC, and that you didn't step foot in BC when you did that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to be honest with you. I really, it wasn't as fun a film for me to make as a filmmaker, because I had also put the same challenge to myself. And I really felt that there needed to be, I was very, I felt the Jasmine story needed to be told. And yet it was all the way across the country. And so I basically, you know, coordinated everything from my home, which was different than going there and being somewhere and meeting people and feeling the connection that way. So I think, you know, there's always pros and cons to this, right? But I really, like I said before, I really felt like, and I still feel that way, that I and we needed to walk, like to literally experiment with new ways of doing things. So for example, one of the projects I'm working on right now, it's a cycling tour through the city of Montreal. It's called Wastescapes. And it's basically, I'm trying to go even thinner with media. So it's all, it's like cinema through an app. And the idea is, you know, zero waste. So get on your bike, go experience some of the out of sight, out of mind waste sites throughout the city. But, you know, really trying to use communications in strategic ways through moving images, or through walking or cycling tours. So yeah, so it was really hard that I didn't get to meet Yasmin in person, but but she had inspired me, and it was just the right thing to do. So
no, that's so. Did you like measure a carbon footprint for the film? Was there a number that came out of it or anything like that?
That's such a good question. We didn't get literal like that, but I kind of wish we had. I think there's some really beautiful initiatives of you know, trying to visualize that. Again, I think that like the word I use around like zero waste is sort of aspirational. So reducing our carbon footprint always has to be aspirational. I mean, we're so entangled with so many different issues that if we start beating ourselves up, I fear that we will stop being creative and productive and taking on challenges. So the aspiration, I didn't do that, but I might have.
I had to ask. I'm a numbers person. So
are you? Okay, that's interesting. Yeah.
But I think, you know what, people are getting lots of good feedback in the chat, but we might be able to give people back a little bit of time to their evening, which, you know, never happens on Zoom. But did you have any kind of final thoughts, questions, comments, just things you wanted to share before we wrap it up?
Well, you know, I'll share two things. This is the complicated part. The complicated part was, you asked about the carbon footprint. And I think the complicated thing is us thinking that just because we're not in planes, but that we're online, that we're reducing our waste. I think this whole Zoom, I think it's perfect that we end a little early, because I think one of the challenges for us is really beginning to visualize all of the waste of like all the data centers around the world, and what all of this means, our reliance on these data infrastructures and the energy that supplies. So it's not to beat ourselves up, but it's only to make visible and become aware of the different ways that we impact our environment. And, you know, things like consuming less, just overall. Yeah, sure, why not? Ending 10 minutes early so that we can all go outside and just appreciate you. And maybe we're not marching together, but, you know, go outside and just kind of breathe deep, breathe in. So I guess, yeah, just I love the comments here. I can tell this is a really committed, amazing group of people who've come together. And I am just happy we are kind of working in tandem. So just super appreciation for you hosting this beautiful event. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And I mean, the constant kind of downfalls, but also the joys of Zoom. I know we have folks who have logged on from not just Ottawa, from other places around the country, which wouldn't happen otherwise. And thank you so much, Liz, for joining us and for all the incredible and super inspirational work that you do. And yeah, someone just said in the chat that it's inspiring, and I think they're totally right. We'll give you back 10 minutes of your evening and hope that everyone else enjoyed this as much as we did. Definitely feel free to go outside after this, but I will also say that we have a session coming up. It starts in 10 minutes, but it's a drop-in out all night, a virtual drag, burlesque, dance, DJing evening for your Friday. So you might also choose to join that. And we've also got a keynote speech tomorrow by Gina Wilson. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining this evening. Thank you so much, Liz, for being here, and hope you all have an amazing evening and weekend.
Take care. Thanks, Chloe. Keep up the good work.
Thank you. You too.